All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. I know that we have more people who will be able to join us. And I know that during the lunch hour for most of us, people are grabbing drinks and grabbing their brown bags. So again, I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to be here with us. And welcome. My name is Jeannie Infante Sager, and I have the privilege of serving as director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute. And we are grateful that all of you are joining us today for this important conversation and discussion as we think about how will women's philanthropy transform in 2022. From the great resignation to the continued effects of COVID, women's giving patterns will continue to evolve as we head into the new year. And we are excited to explore research-driven insights that helps inform trends we are seeing around gender and giving. Joining us in this conversation are three phenomenal leaders in the field. Veronica Dagher, author and personal finance reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Lisa Eisen, co-president of the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies, and Nicole Robinson, CEO of YWCA Metropolitan Chicago. We are all looking forward to hearing their insights on gender and philanthropy and how these trends resonate for them and the vital work that they do and engage in. At WPI, we say that research is just the beginning. It's what you do with it that matters. And so we want to be sure to include all of you in the conversation and want to hear from you throughout the presentation, through the chat, and about what resonates for you and your experience. And we also invite you to enter any questions that you might have for the panelists in the chat as well. And before we jump into our conversation, let's set the stage by sharing some top trends that we think will continue to inform, influence, and impact women's philanthropy in the coming year and beyond. So this is always the scary part. I'm going to share the screen or attempt to. So while we have more friends join us, I'll get this going. I'm going to rely on my friends to let me know that they can see this. Yes. Okay, great. All right. So as we get started, please do note, as you see on the screen, our social media handles and tag us at WPI Insights and use hashtag WPI Trends to join the conversation and create some energy online. And again, I can't thank Veronica, Lisa, and Nicole enough for taking time out of their very full lives to be with us today. So I think we can all agree that it has been an interesting and auspicious beginning of a new decade. We have reimagined almost every aspect of our lives during this pandemic and have pivoted, retooled, and perhaps even invented new ways of doing and being. COVID-19 continues to influence how we do all the things, and philanthropy is no exception. WPI's most recent report explores this exact topic, titled COVID-19, Generosity and Gender, How Giving Changed During the First Year of a Global Pandemic. The research revealed that single women and married couples gave less compared to pre-pandemic levels and compared to single men. And this is a pattern that differs from previous research. And so during our time today, we'll be exploring the question, how will women's philanthropy transform in 2022? We've identified 5 key trends informed by our body of research. So our research shows that broadly defining the term philanthropy is key to engaging a diverse group of donors. Yes, it's important to give money to charitable organizations, but there are so many generous activities, from using money differently, like impact investing or buying from companies with a social mission, to other activities like volunteering, sharing about causes, and advocating for certain causes or organizations in your communities. We often describe this as the T's. Most everyone is familiar with time, talent, and treasure, but this broader definition encompasses testimony and ties. And I'll talk about a sixth T in a little bit, trust. And expanding the definition of philanthropy has always been important, but this idea is gaining traction more broadly. If you read Mackenzie Scott's most recent essay about giving at the end of December, this was one of her main points, that anyone can be a philanthropist because anyone can help another person in some way, financial or otherwise. And we think this will be a major area of emphasis in 2022 and beyond for women's philanthropy. The second trend, our research shows that parents and children influence one another's generosity. In particular, our Women Give 2018 report showed that when parents give, their children are more likely to grow up to donate. And this effect is stronger for girls compared to boys. Our research also emphasizes the importance of intentionality in passing on values of generosity. When parents talk to their children about giving, as opposed to just role modeling giving, those children are more likely to donate themselves. During the last couple of years, many of us have been getting a lot more FaceTime with our kids at home, for better or for worse. But this means more opportunities to engage kids in these activities and discussions that will help them become generous adults. And in 2022 and beyond, we see this passing down of giving legacies as an important principle, especially as we help parents understand how they can do so most effectively. Our third trend is intersectionality. Intersectionality, simply put, is the idea that people have overlapping identities, gender, race, class, etc., and therefore different experiences in society. We have seen intersectionality come up in conversations about giving for racial and social justice, giving by people across the gender spectrum, and how different factors like race, wealth, and gender impact philanthropy. We use this concept in our research constantly because we know that these overlapping identities affect people's giving. And we expect that intersectionality will continue to be a driving concept in women's philanthropy moving forward. We don't want to look at women donors as a monolithic block, but understand that different women come to philanthropy with different identities and experiences, and that shapes where and how they give. Our fourth trend is participatory engagement and trust-based philanthropy. There's that T. These terms basically mean that donors trust the organizations they're giving to, and in that spirit, don't burden them with rigorous reporting or other time-consuming or difficult requirements. Participatory engagement involves the idea of doing with rather than for. Solutions are designed or co-designed with the same groups who would benefit from or be the targets of such an approach. In the big picture, this involves donors recognizing power differentials between themselves and recipients and taking steps to reduce those differentials. Giving circles are certainly a part of this trend and lead in this initiative. And many donors have been practicing this sort of giving for years, but Mackenzie Scott's use of these principles has thrust them into the spotlight in terms of women's philanthropy. Finally, the last trend we want to highlight for women's philanthropy is looking at how it has changed over time. How has women's philanthropy changed in recent decades? And what is to come for women's philanthropy given an uncertain future? WPI's most recent report was something of a wake-up call to the fact that women have been disproportionately influenced by COVID-19, the associated economic downturn, and the ongoing Great Resignation. So we asked the question, will women's giving rebound quickly? Or is this the start of a more challenging era in women's philanthropy? And so with that brief overview of what WPI sees as 5 key trends in women's philanthropy going into 2022, I am so excited to welcome our panelists and kick off what I know is going to be a dynamic and engaging discussion. So let's welcome to the conversation, Veronica Dagher, again, author and personal finance reporter at the Wall Street Journal, Lisa Eisen, co-president of the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies, and Nicole Robinson, CEO of the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago. So let me stop sharing my the PowerPoint and slide deck, and let's get into this conversation. And so our first question is for all of you. So just as I shared with regards to what our WPI's most recent report on gender and giving during the pandemic shared with us about what the disproportionate impact that this pandemic has had on women. What are your thoughts, given your diverse perspectives and experiences around this question? Will women's giving rebound quickly, or is this the start of a more challenging era in women's philanthropy? And I'll start with you, Veronica. Would you like to take this first response?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I think it's a complicated question because, as you mentioned, women were disproportionately hit by this pandemic in terms of job losses and caregiving responsibilities. Especially women of color have really been hit hard during this very difficult time for many people. I think there's still a lot of challenges that remain, right? So we've got this ongoing uncertainty about our health. Some people are very worried about this economy, especially on the lower middle income levels. I think a lot of people are feeling crunched, especially as inflation ticks up. I think that's going to be a challenge for givers and also philanthropy and charities themselves. So you've got the ongoing health uncertainty. You've got people worried about their families, their own livelihoods. And you also have this inflation. We're not sure how hot it's going to run. We'll see what happens. You also have the challenge of that lack of volunteer connection. So I just know for myself in New York, I'm in Jersey now, but I used to live in New York, and I would spend a good amount of time volunteering with my favorite charities in person. I know myself and a lot of my friends are no longer having those opportunities because things have changed because of COVID. I think this is a challenge for charities to cope with. If you don't have that emotional connection, you don't have those volunteers in your house seeing all the good that you do, I think that can make things a little bit more difficult when it comes time to ask for gifts. On the flip side, as you mentioned, we're seeing big donors like Mackenzie and Melinda really setting the stage, really bringing a lot of focus to some of these important issues, especially for women. So you could have a situation where, and I think this is probably in general, maybe what happened during the pandemic, is that you've got a smaller number of donors, but you've got the bigger names, you've got your bigger donors carrying the day. And then hopefully eventually a broader base of donors will reemerge once things stabilize. But I think COVID has called into question so many different aspects of our lives, philanthropy included.
Yeah, absolutely, Veronica. I saw a lot of nodding heads among our guests who are also seeing that and experiencing that. Let me ask Lisa the same question, especially as a funder that has identified women and girls as a priority. What are your thoughts about where we're headed here?
Yeah, first, I just want to thank you for including me in this distinguished panel, and thanks to you, Jeannie, and to your team for focusing attention on this really important topic. My reflections are not that different than what we just heard. I think we could say that it's something of the best of times, worst of times for women's philanthropy. Certainly the bad news, we just heard from Veronica, the economic impacts of the pandemic, and especially their toll, as we saw in this report, on single women's giving, and certainly the impact on women of color in particular. And while I was glad to see that more charitable dollars were going to organizations focused on health and basic needs, including support for women and girls, it's still a minimal increase, especially considering what a small fraction of the giving to women and girls is. Obviously, we make up about 50% of the world's population, but only 1.9% of charitable dollars are going to organizations focused on advancing women's health and safety and rights. And this is simply unacceptable. And I think we're in a situation, and this report really highlighted it, that men continue to hold the majority of wealth in this country, and that women were disproportionately affected by this. And so the She Session, the very low women's unemployment rates, it's been 30 years since this few women have been in the marketplace. And reports are that women's employment versus men's employment may not recover until 2024, 2 years after men's employment. So these are concerning trends for women's philanthropy, and it will take some time for us to regain our former economic power and giving ability. But as Veronica said, I think there are real bright spots, and I believe, I'm an optimist, the best of women's philanthropy is actually ahead of us. We are seeing more major women philanthropists take the reins. More women leaders at major foundations are drawing attention to issues of gender and reproductive and racial equity. Last year, our foundation and our chair, Stacey Schusterman, joined with Melinda Gates and Mackenzie Scott for a competition called the Equality Can't Wait Challenge. And it contributed a groundbreaking $48 million to organizations committed to advancing gender equality in the US. And so the entry into the field of major women philanthropists who are willing to take bold risks, prioritize giving to organizations led by and serving women, especially of women of color, I think that is a game changer for women's philanthropy. And I believe that events like this and the kind of writing and speaking that some of us do to draw attention to women's philanthropic power and the urgent need for us to give more generously toward women and girls, we'll see more funders following their lead. Two more quick points. One is, I have seen that the assault on reproductive rights in this country has been a wake-up call for women, and I'm seeing more funders stepping up to help preserve these rights and help ensure that women can have health care that they need and ability to control their bodies and their destinies. And finally, perhaps one of the biggest trends that will affect women's philanthropy is that women's wealth is expected to triple by the end of the decade. And a McKinsey study showed that women are projected to take over an additional 20 trillion in wealth this decade, leaving us in control of 30 trillion in assets by 2030. So as more women gain more wealth, we will have a greater ability to scale up our philanthropic giving. And I hope to direct a lot of that money to organizations that advance women and girls.
Thank you, Lisa, for those insights and really framing the opportunities and the challenges ahead for us in the year. Nicole, you've been on the front lines of this pandemic. What would you add to this to that question?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jeannie, and Veronica and Lisa. You guys are spot on. Economically, the one thing I would add is the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs are Black women. So I think there is a philanthropic revolution happening. Women will lead the way. We will save ourselves. I'm very confident of that. We will save ourselves. No one is coming to rescue us. We do not believe that anymore. And we will save ourselves. So Black women will be a part of that movement. I also agree that although the wealth is concentrated with men now, women will at some point on have a private wealth in the US, and women will inherit significant intergenerational wealth. So it is coming. I'd also say that women and people of color give more. It is a downtick now, but we have defined what generosity means today, and we will continue to define it in the future. I'd also say that we are at an intersection of a woke hope, and collective healing moment.
Mm.
And I want to evoke, one of my favorite authors and feminist writers who just passed, broke my heart, Bell Hooks. And she says, true resistance begins when people confront pain and want to do something to change it. That is where we are as a society in this moment. There are so many philanthropists who see things differently now. They are not the philanthropists they were of the past, and their giving has become more sophisticated, where they want to understand economic inequity. They want to understand racism and sexism, the role that structures and policies play in, locking people out of opportunity, what that has done in the past. So I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg. That's what's supposed to happen in that area. And there's just a new understanding of what we can do. And as someone who is leading a large institution that's over, nearly 150 years old, we've been at the intersection of different movements where women have been at the forefront: the Industrial Revolution, civil rights, wars, the women's rights movement. We've been at every movement, and we've had a moment like this where there was a little fizzle. There was a little a moment where we said, wait a minute, we're going in the wrong direction. But I'm an optimist, and we're going to go up. We might actually get a Black woman Supreme Court justice. What would that look like for Black women and girls and women in this entire country? So I'm going to stop there, but I'm bullish. Hopefully everybody knows that I'm bullish on women and girls.
I think you're in a very supportive audience here. So let's channel this energy in this Zoom room and yeah, change the narrative and make this happen. I'm going to stick with you, Nicole, and kind of go back to something that Lisa shared earlier in her comment. So as the new fantastic CEO of YWCA Metropolitan Chicago, you've also been active with the Chicago Foundation for Women, founding the Southside Giving Circle to support Black women and girls. And as Lisa already lifted up and amplified, last year's Women and Girls Index showed us that charitable support for women and girls is still relatively low at 1.9%. Compared to total giving. How do you think we can change giving to these organizations in 2022 and beyond?
It's going to change. It goes back to, we're going to save ourselves. And as one of the founders, along with 6 other dynamic women of what is called a Southside Giving Circle, the first ever giving circle on the South Side of Chicago, Black women led, committed to the social, economic, and political empowerment of women, where they all invest a minimum of $1,000 of their resources, and collectively they invest in organizations that are centered on women and girls and lift them up and shine a light on them. Because part of it, and what we've learned through the pandemic, is the nonprofit sector knows what to do. Women-led organizations know what to do. They're just under-resourced. So we don't need, I love my donors, but we want them to be our allies and partners, not just the transaction of the dollar. So I think that that's what's beautiful about a giving circle. It creates, when I talked about collective healing, that's the power of a giving circle, because people, Black women who historically have been marginalized understand that pain. They are not just in proximity to it, they feel it and live it every day. And I think women across this country, there's been a movement around circles where women can come together and talk about issues that face women and girls, and then be active participants and allies in doing something about it, and actually investing their dollars and resources and time. And I think giving circles are something that, think about the healing that provided for people during the pandemic. There's a lot of things people couldn't go do and create community around. But what I know about the Giving Circle in Chicago and ones around the country is that they could still come together, they could still convene, they can still be a part of this larger ecosystem.
Right. And again, as our research has shown, women are drawn to community both online and offline. And I think we're really quick to make that transition in this pandemic. And while Veronica shared earlier, we missed that in person. We still craved it and made that happen for us as we again reimagined and retooled and pivoted through this over the last 22 months. Veronica, I want to go back to dig into something that you were sharing with regards to these notable gifts that we have seen from the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Foundation and Mackenzie Scott and Melinda French, and this coming together, right? To back to this collective healing, these major funders coming together to address major systemic structural change, right? So you have covered wealth and gender over the years, for many years. In your view, what do you think the effect of these large gifts might be? Do they tend to hurt, or are they encouraging others to give, especially among individual donors who may feel that their gift isn't needed or they can't do enough to make an impact? Thoughts?
Good question. I think just to go back to some of these big gifts, we're talking Mackenzie, Melinda, I think it's so interesting because traditionally philanthropy has been seen as a boys' club. Now, I think everyone on this call very well knows for years, centuries, there's been plenty of women philanthropists, plenty of women making those big gifts. But for whatever reason, the guys were the ones getting the headlines. Mm-hmm. I think what Mackenzie and Melinda are doing now is they're changing that. They're giving us a bigger face of philanthropy, giving women a face of philanthropy, which is very exciting. To your question, I think for some people, this is super inspiring. Your research has shown that women are inspired by other women giving, and they look to other women when they do that and say, you know what, maybe if she does it, I can do it too. And that's exciting. And Mackenzie and Melinda are bringing women's empowerment more into focus. They're shining the spotlight on issues and charities that some women may not know about. And I think that can be really exciting for some donors of all income levels. On the flip side, to your point, some people may find that really intimidating. Like, I'm not a millionaire, I'm not a billionaire. How am I ever going to move the needle? What does it matter? I don't even know what a philanthropist is. That's such a kind of a abstract word. That's not me. Never mind. I'm not going to send you my $10. So I think this is where the charities come in. And I think some of this is redefining philanthropy, or as you had said before, creating a broader definition of philanthropy. I think that it's on the onus of the charities to make sure that broad definition is known. So maybe you're not even using the word philanthropy for most of your donors. You're using other words that are more approachable. I think that's really important for charities to consider in this environment. Also, given the fact that so many women are so stretched right now, between the caregiving and all the other issues we're dealing with, when you're trying to target those women donors and saying, hey, this is for you, you matter, we want you to be a part of this cause, I think it's super important to make it as easy as possible. Like, I'm a new mom, like, just give me like 2 buttons to tap on my phone. Let me donate that way. Call it a day. Like, don't make it more complex and more time consuming, because me and so many other moms right now and so many other women right now, like, we're just trying to get through the day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great point, Veronica. And it is that idea. It's that idea that women are drawn less to the word and term philanthropy or philanthropist, but are very drawn to this idea of being generous. That's the way they like to be how they engage in philanthropy is really this understanding of generosity, and wanting to be generous, and that resonates for them. And so one of the questions in the chat has to do about how do we start cultivating women differently? And I think language matters in all the ways, whether it's bringing them in, it's giving circles in terms of accessibility, right? It's all the things, and being able. And the great thing about women, and what the research shows, is they're willing to use all the tools. If you just give them more tools, they will use them. In fact, one of our research reports around impact investing showed that women use impact investing to complement their philanthropy, whereas men tend to use impact investing to replace their philanthropy. So we're not an either or, we're a both and. And if you can just give us the tools, we're happy to try them, use them, see what works for us. We had similar results that came out of the crowdfunding report that we did last year. Women are interested in seeing what that is and how that works. And to your point, Veronica, seemingly easy, right? Because they can just click and give to who they want to give and what causes they want to give without having, to go through too many loops and too many jumps. So very interesting. Thank you so much. Lisa, I want to talk to you. So you're unique to this panel because you come here as a grant maker, right? And in particular, you oversee U.S. Jewish and gender and reproductive equity portfolios. So you talked a little bit about this in the response to our first question, but I want to give you an opportunity to dig in a little bit more. As a grant maker, how are you thinking about the intersection between gender equity and racial justice? And how will this understanding continue to evolve in 22 from your lens?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Honestly, understanding and investing in this intersection of gender equity and racial justice, it is crucial to our grant making at Schusterman. And we believe it's essential to achieving true gender equality in this country. We've seen, and we heard about this a little bit earlier, women of color are leading with strength and clarity and entrepreneurship, and that is so inspiring. But they also have made it clear to us that we miss a lot when we don't center their experience and their needs, and it also puts them and really all of us at risk. And because they experience intertwined and compounding impacts of sexism and racism, women of color face disproportionate challenges to all the areas that we're investing in at Schusterman, which is gaining political economic power, accessing reproductive health care and knowledge, and living free from harassment and violence. The disparities have been around for a long time in the US, but the pandemic has obviously further exposed and exacerbated them. And just one or two examples in the area of political power. Black women were a major driving force in the elections and paved the way for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to win in 2020, but they are vastly underrepresented as political candidates, representing 8% of the US population, but under 5% of elected office holders. Black and Latino women being at the forefront of the Great Resignation and staying out of the workforce in alarming rates. Black women 3 times as likely as white women to lose their lives from domestic abuse. And in terms of reproductive rights, Black, Latina, Indigenous women, LGBTQ people, communities of color struggle much more with access to abortion care, and they're disproportionately impacted by laws like SB 8 in Texas. And I shudder to think about the impact of what is likely to be the overturn of Roe v. Wade in this year. So, I mean, to us, it's very clear that the struggle for gender equity and the struggle for racial equity are inextricably linked. And we believe that only by focusing our efforts on women of color and those who are most marginalized will we really lift up all women. So, I mean, what does that look like for us in 2022? And it looks like centering the voices and the needs of Black women, Indigenous women, and women of color in our gender and reproductive equity work, centering their leadership, their knowledge, their voices, contributing to BIPOC-led organizations, supporting what we call pro-women women running for office, investing in policy solutions for economic equity and efforts for economic recovery, especially those that focus on fields disproportionately occupied by women of color, such as care work, investing in prevention of violence, harassment, and abuse, and supporting survivors, and investing in the expansion of reproductive health services, especially in communities of color. So to us, there's no way to separate this, and the way to all of our liberation is through the liberation of women of color.
Thanks, Lisa. And I really want to stick with this intersectionality. And actually, there was a great question that came through the chat from our good friend Kathleen Lair. And so this question is for any of you. How do we encourage this? How can nonprofits better welcome in all women of all backgrounds? What aren't they doing now that they could start? Maybe Nicole, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I would love that. And Lisa, thank you. I loved your comment. Thank you for centering on Black women. I love that. I would say it goes back to a couple of things I thought I heard. We got to align vision and movement building and go from donors to allyship. Allyship was the word of 2021. And I think that along with centering on Black women, so as organizations, we need to start with them. If they are the most marginalized Black, Indigenous people of color, then when we create programs, when we develop policies, how are they at the table alongside us, making the decision making and being a part of the process? It's looking at our organizations and our institutions. Who is governing those organizations? Who are the leaders that are making the decisions inside those organizations? It also means a movement, right? Like, are we centering them on the movement and letting them lead us, right? Who is leading the movement? Are we just asking people for opinions and then we lead it, then other people lead it? Or are we actually asking the people who are most impacted by the work? And I do think this matters for giving, because this transaction of the donor, I want that donor to go from that transaction to true allyship, which means you're with us because we are facing, the critical issues that Lisa highlighted are things that aren't going to be eradicated through a program or one moment or one investment. It's like we need people on the long haul, in the long haul. So as nonprofits, it's part of our responsibility. It's the mission of the YWCA, again, to empower women, to eliminate racism, to unlock economic opportunities for women, to address the health challenges that women across Chicagoland face. There's been a silent, in our Chicagoland area, a Black woman can go missing and no one says anything. It's quiet. There's silence, right? True allyship is, hey, we're looking for that Black woman. We're trying to understand what's happening. Why is there an assault, physically, politically, emotionally, and on trans Black women? I see that comment. Yes. Why is there this silent assault that no one is responding to? And people don't feel included when we're not responding to their needs, if we're not feeling, we're not being a true ally with them.
Yeah, it's about being seen. Thank you for that. I do. There's another great question that came through the chat that I want to throw out to Veronica, because I think it's also important in this trend of intersectionality, and it's about women's financial literacy. Veronica, do you have any thoughts on the role that plays in terms of empowering and helping women to kind of stand firmly in their own philanthropy?
For sure. I think financial literacy is super important. I think the role it can play in this is, and I think perhaps it's donors who don't think they have enough to give, because if you don't have a sense of your overall finances, you don't have a good grasp on your investments or your spending or your saving, you may say to yourself, well, I have nothing to give, I have nothing left, or it doesn't apply to me. I think this financial literacy can really help people become aware of their greater financial picture. And I think that can start really young as some school age kids. And having that education and that information can empower you to feel more confident about your finances and perhaps more confident to give. So I think those are where the two intersect. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it is how I often frame it is this idea that, women have not been invited to many of the tables. And one of them is understanding how to build wealth. And that is still really relatively new for so many women. And if we think about all of the data that Lisa shared with us about the amount of wealth that is going to be in the hands of women, then it behooves us to have a better understanding of how to center that wealth to create and empower the world that a woman donor, wishes to see, right? So we'll invite more questions in the chat, but seeing at the time, I'd love to kind of get some final thoughts from each of you and help inspire the nearly 300 participants that we've had today. Lisa, I'll start with you. What are you hopeful about in the year ahead? And how will philanthropy continue to inspire us?
It's hard to maintain hope in the world that we're facing so far in 2022, but I'm an optimist, and as you heard earlier, I have a lot of faith in the future of women's philanthropy. But I think the thing I'm most excited about is the rise of collaborative giving. And I think we've just seen that funders at all different giving levels, when they come together to pool efforts and capital, our ability to magnify our leverage and our impact and our power is just enormous. And, I mentioned the Equality Can't Wait Challenge, which was a highlight, I think, for me last year. And I've seen a lot of, at the foundation level, a lot of funders coming together in collaborative giving. We are members of a number of new collaboratives, the Collaborative for Gender and Reproductive Equity, which is a growing community of donors who are united to advance gender, reproductive, and racial equity, and the CARE Fund to support care infrastructure, the Collective Future Fund to prevent violence against women. So there are these foundation collaboratives. Then there are the women giving networks, such as Women Donors Network, Women Moving Millions, where they're really aggregating and leveraging their individual giving. And the giving circles, which Nicole, you mentioned the Southside Giving Circle, and it's such a great example of that power. Giving circles have tripled in the last decade and are such a great way to engage more individual donors of all different income levels. And they're mostly comprised of women. So I believe that they are a really promising source of increased charitable giving for women and girls' causes. So I'm hopeful that with all this collaborative giving, the future of women's philanthropy will be more generous, be more democratic, more strategic, and more impactful than ever.
And I said that is a great example of what Nicole was sharing, how women are changing the narrative. Those are trends and preferences for giving that have been demonstrated by our research. But think of how it is scaled up in that way, and is inspiring and influencing how funders are really coming together. So thank you for that, Lisa. Veronica, what about you? What are you hopeful in the year ahead when we look at women's philanthropy, and how will it continue to inspire us as we head into 2022?
I'm hopeful about the fact, at least anecdotally, I'm hearing more women taking higher roles or those top roles at foundations and other philanthropic institutions. I think that's really exciting. Hearing anecdotally, again, would love to see your recent stats about how many more women on boards. In my circle, I'm hearing about more of that, which is exciting. Also very excited about the work in the caregiving space. Melinda and Mackenzie, again, are leading the way in that. It seems like there's an increased focus on how to solve this caregiving issue for women in this country. And that's a very exciting area to watch. That gives me a lot of hope as a young mom, a new mom. And I'm curious to see where that goes. I think not only are people putting their dollars, but they're putting their voices behind what they're focused on and leading the way for women. So that's very exciting for me.
Yeah. And to your point, Veronica, the pandemic threw a spotlight on all of the work that women do and have always done, but maybe people didn't realize that until they were stuck at home and figured out that we were doing 4 or 5 jobs, right? Along with our full-time, work job, right? And this idea that our experiences should influence making our lives better, through policy and coming together to find solutions for that. So thank you, Veronica, for that. And Nicole, we'll ask you the same question. What are you hopeful about? How will philanthropy continue to inspire us?
Veronica and Lisa, they said it best, but I will say that coalitions, I think that there's an emerging number of coalitions and funding groups. The Black Freedom Fund, the Black Lives Matter movement was led by women. Mm-hmm. Led by women. So I think I'm encouraged about, because what we're thinking about at the YWCA is also the programs that help support women and girls. But we're also thinking about the policies and what policies do we need to do advance to change the narrative. I'm encouraged about the language changing. This idea, this broadened definition of what a philanthropist means. Our giving circle, we call ourselves queen makers. And that was, again, allowing philanthropists to describe who they are and why that matters. I would also end with the trust piece and the sense of community that happens, because we are not alone as philanthropists and change makers in this work. And that is at the intersection of resistance and why it's so encouraging to me. And I'd say that philanthropists are giving the money to organizations, the administrative hoops and barriers. Thank you, Lisa. You guys are changing how you partner with organizations and how you lead this work. And that's giving us the freedom as women to decide what is best for us and how we will drive the change, because it is us. We know what to do. No one needs to save us. So thank you.
We can save ourselves and we will, because no one else is going to do it if we don't, right? Thank you. So I speak for everyone on this Zoom call to say that you have left us all inspired. And I hope, and it was our hope at the WPI team to really encourage everyone in this room to know that the work that you do is so important, and engaging more women will help change, make the change that we want to see. And I'll end with this. The last trend we talked about was longitudinal, and in just the last 30 minutes, we've already talked about how much has changed in terms of women standing firm and creating change through philanthropy. And so we love data here at WPI. And one of my favorite new signs says, follow your heart, but lead with data. And I think that's a wonderful way to describe how women like to give. I think they want to give from their heart, but they want to be smart about it. So events like this, conversations like this, discussions, the chat that was happening today on the side, that helps our heart, helps us understand heart, because it helps us understand that we are being smart about this, that we can lead the way. And so I really want to thank you again, Veronica, Lisa, Nicole, for joining us. I want to thank everyone who took time out of their day to join us for this event. And we look forward to seeing you throughout the year. So stay engaged and stay connected with WPI.